Welcome to Lexington, Missouri.
To locate the name, find the name you're looking for, tap on the name and the proper information in a photo, if available, will appear in the upper right portion of the screen. Click to search last names button. You will notice a button named View Map to the right of the photo. Tap it to see a detailed map of the grave location. Certain names may have a grave marker. The map shows you where you're currently located in a blue highlighted block where the grave is located. Tap on the map to zoom in on the block that is highlighted. Please refer to the lot number you are looking for in the zoomed in map. Tap the back to search screen button to return to the search screen.
Number 14.
Certain memorials may have video or audio.
Machpelah Cemetery is located in Lexington, Missouri, and it is one of the oldest and largest cemeteries that is still currently in use in Lexington, Missouri. I'm going to read a little bit from a website called hearthstonelegacy.com, and it has some information on Machpelah Cemetery that I thought was really useful and had some cool details in it. So I'm going to share a little bit of that. And so anyway, it says that a special act of the Missouri legislature incorporated Machpelah Cemetery in 1849. The cemetery actually dates back to 1839 when John Taylor Waddell was buried in the Waddell family cemetery, which over the next several years was replaced by and greatly expanded into what is now Machpelah Cemetery. The cemetery has been expanded by several additions over the years to bring Machpelah Cemetery to its current size. So if you look at this on a map, it's a little funky because it did have the weird addition, so it wasn't master planned. They just added to it over the years. So William Bradford Waddell was one of the three original members of Russell's, Major, and Waddell, the founders and operators of the Pony Express. So when we're talking about Waddell family, that was one of the members of the Waddell family, and so this was part of their land from 1939 when John Taylor Waddell was buried in the Waddell family cemetery, and that was what they expanded on. So anyway, founders of the Pony Express there, along with Russell and Majors as well. Interesting fun fact, the Waddles had a huge house actually in Lexington. It's still standing there today. It was one of the first homes in Lexington. So pretty cool stuff with the Pony Express history there. Stephen Wentworth was one of the founders of the Wentworth Military Academy that was established in Lexington from like the 1880s all the way up until I want to say like 2017, and so that was a huge draw to the local area there. But anyway, he's buried there as well, founder of that academy. Gilead Roop, one of the first white settlers in Lexington, is buried there. The All family, which were the grocers, early merchants in Lexington, are buried there. Now, also, the name of Machpelah Cemetery is a biblical reference to the cave or tomb which Abraham purchased when Sarah died. In time, this was the burial place of not only Sarah, but also of Abraham, Isaac, Rebekah, Jacob, and Leah. And so that's Genesis 23:19, and it says, "And after this, Abraham buried Sarah, his wife, in the cave of the field of Machpelah before Mamre. The same is Hebron in the land of Canaan." The brochure for Machpelah Cemetery has a little bit of history on it as well, so I will read from that too. It says, Machpelah is Missouri's most celebrated cemetery. As one of the oldest corporations in continual existence in Missouri, Machpelah traces its beginning to John Taylor Waddell, who purchased a small tract of land for a family cemetery in 1836. At his death in 1839, he was the first person to be buried there. Subsequently, his son William Bradford Waddell donated adjacent land, which was incorporated as Machpelah Cemetery by a special act of the Missouri State Legislature in 1849. So that was the founding date. It also talks about Genesis 23, which we just mentioned. And it says, our Machpelah mirrors the history of both Lexington and America, even before we became a nation. Here lie immigrants, pioneers, statesmen, explorers, seekers of religious freedom, educators, soldiers, great and common men whose gravestones often reflect the style and times of their lives as well as our country. Due to fires, no records exist before 1885 and between 1920 and 1940. Marty Bernetti of Odessa, Missouri has conducted a block-by-block walking identification survey of all grave names and inscriptions. Her work was completed in 1977 and is on file in the Lexington Public Library. Records have been maintained since then. Today, Machpelah is managed and operated by a board of directors composed of volunteer area citizens, just as it has been since the beginning. A couple of the notable people. Let's see, there's several of them. Of course, we already mentioned William Waddell, co-founder of the Pony Express. There's also John Waddell, who bought the original family plot and was the first to be buried there. Millwright and businessman, his 1836 home, the oldest in Lexington at 1611 South Street, is still standing and it's still owned by somebody. Alonzo Slayback, adventurer traveler who rode with General Shelby in the Civil War, a lawyer and politician, is also buried there. Stephen Wentworth, banker and founder of the Wentworth Military Academy in 1880. Gilead Roop, commonly accepted as the first white settler in Lafayette County, arriving in 1815. Ebenezer Pomeroy, gentleman farmer, land developer, entrepreneur, who buried the family plot with his wife. Robert Taubman, lawyer and judge. His stone is the tallest in Missouri. His house was at 1522 South Street. It reflects the opulent style of the Victorian era in Lexington. Lexington has gorgeous old antebellum homes. They survived the Civil War, so you can go and see the style, every architectural style, many architectural styles from that era, all the way through the Victorian times on the streets of Lexington, Missouri, and some of the streets are even still brick. There's also a Civil War mass grave in Machpelah Cemetery. It's for men who gave their lives for the Confederate cause at the successful siege of Lexington in September 1861. I believe there are also Union soldiers buried in Machpelah Cemetery as well. Specifically, that Civil War mass grave from the siege of Lexington in September of 1861. Interesting fun fact, I found out that my great-great-great-grandpa fought in that battle. He was a colonel, and he was like 63 years old when he was trying to do that. And he got a big head wound and a leg wound, and that ended his time as a Southern soldier. And then he moved back to Kentucky. Anyway. This is the Saluda Memorial, which was a steamboat that crashed in the Missouri River, or exploded in the Missouri River. Saluda Memorial in memory of those who lost their lives in the explosion of the steamboat Saluda on April 9th, 1852, many of whom are buried here in a common grave. The total loss of life was never definitely determined, but was estimated at about 100, as many were blown into the river and lost. Most of the casualties were Mormon converts en route to Salt Lake City from Great Britain. Historical records list the known dead and missing, and there's a list of them, and some of them, their bodies were never found. So they're buried here. This is the north central portion of Machpelah Cemetery in Lexington, Missouri. Today is January 28th, Saturday, January 28th, 2023. It says Christian Grandorf buried here with his family. This German immigrant came to America after being recruited by Lexington Germans. Germans were eagerly welcomed to this area because of their work ethic. I can attest to that because my mom's family is Missouri Germans, and they were all that way. And I am too. He operated a grocery store at the corner of Franklin and 13th for many years. William Limerick, banker and businessman. His state-of-the-art home is 2.5 miles southeast of Lexington, built in 1850 at a cost of $85,000, still occupied and visited today. Eldridge Burden, the first elected mayor of Lexington when it was relocated and rechartered in 1845, orphaned at the age of 7 and adopted by the governor of his home state, Kentucky. Moved to Lexington in 1833 and rose to prominence as a state legislator, judge, and president of the state bank. That is amazing. It's amazing how rugged and how much people could endure back in that time period. How resilient they were. We can all learn from the resilience of people who were in this area in the 1800s. Robert All, with his brother James, developed a thriving mercantile enterprise in Lexington, probably the most prominent on the Santa Fe Trail. They outfitted westward bound pioneers and Santa Fe traders. Brother James was killed in Chihuahua, Mexico on a buying trip. So Lexington also has Santa Fe Trail history. And being that Lexington was one of the biggest cities west of the Mississippi, everybody was obviously traveling west, and that was one of the major stopping points. It was a major commercial hub where everybody got what they needed for their journeys. Elizabeth All, sister of Robert All, her estate made Elizabeth All Seminary possible. The Presbyterian School, now a private residence, was located at 766 Highland Avenue. So Lexington, Missouri is next to the Missouri River. It is not too far from Kansas City and Independence, Missouri. And basically, Lexington used to be the most populated town west of St. Louis back in like the early mid 1800s. Lewis and Clark had come through. They had gone down the Missouri River, and Lexington was seen as a place, like it was situated nicely in the river bluffs that overlooked the river, as did several other areas along the Missouri River that became notable stopover points for the river boats. But as the 1800s moved on and Lewis and Clark discovered everything through there, and Missouri became, like after Louisiana purchased, then basically it started becoming settled, and Lexington was seen as a really good area of commerce based on its location situated next to the Missouri River. So I'm going to read a little bit off of this website called Downtown Different, and basically it has a little bit on the history of Lexington, and it says the historic city of Lexington is located on the bluffs overlooking the Missouri River in Lafayette County, Missouri, and Lexington was platted in 1822 near William Jack's Ferry, which had been established just 3 years earlier on the south bank of the river. Now, pause here for a second. Just wanted to note that Missouri River still goes underneath the bluffs of Lexington, and you can go down there and drive over the tracks and go to the little park that's riverfront park area down there, and you can still see the same river. Basically, it's still there. So apparently William Jack had a ferry landing there for these steamboats, and established that back in like 1819. So Lewis and Clark had been through there like 1803, I want to say. So that was only a matter of 16 years or whatever. But anyway, so this website continues, and it says the city was named after Lexington, Kentucky, It's funny because a lot of people from Kentucky did end up in Lexington, Missouri. There were a lot of Kentuckian immigrants. Also, there was people from Virginia and Tennessee and other southern states over there, but or older states. But it's funny because my own great grandpa was from Lexington, Kentucky, and he did move to Cass County, Missouri, back in the 1850s, back when it was just the very edge of the country, and he settled there. But then the war broke out, so he actually went and fought in the Civil War. But my great grandpa ended up settling in Lexington for briefly after the war. That's where he got married, Lexington, Missouri. He met his wife there, and their family lived there, and then they settled there. And to this day, they're actually buried just outside of Lexington in a little town called Wellington. But anyway, this website continues. The earliest settlers were primarily from Kentucky and Virginia. Later came German, Irish, and Italian immigrants. The seat of Lafayette County since 1823, Lexington grew rapidly during the following decades due to its strategic location on the Missouri River. John All opened a mercantile store in 1822. A short time later, he was joined by his brothers Robert and James. All brothers soon had one of the first frontier retail chains, operating stores in Liberty, Independence, and Richmond. So, yeah, Lexington, Missouri was a huge town, major commerce and trade on the new frontier at that time, throughout the 1820s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. The war hit, and then even thereafter. But it was major farm community, rope manufacturing and production, and hemp bales and those sorts of things. It was a really good place to grow those items. And anyway, it was a huge city back then. DowntownDifferent.com has a little bit about Lexington, and it says a little about Lexington. Follow in the steps of Santa Fe traders, steamboat captains, and Civil War soldiers. See Lexington's storied courthouse, battlefield, beautiful antebellum homes, and historic districts. Shop in our antique and specialty shops. Dine in our charming restaurants. Stay in our quaint B&Bs. Explore the beauty and bounty of Lafayette County's orchard country and 5 wineries. You'll feel welcome for a day, a weekend, perhaps even a lifetime. Lexington and Lafayette County are located in the Old Trails tourism region, just 45 minutes east of downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Hannah Coffee and More, Hannah Bananas, Wild West Ice Cream Parlor.
Oh no.
Hannah Bananas. What a gorgeous day for January. What's up there? The Saluda disaster victims have a mass grave in the Machpelah Cemetery. I want to talk a little bit about that. Where did my notes go? Here we are. All right. Found a website that talks a little bit about the Saluda disaster, which occurred on April 9th, 1852. So this was a steamboat that had a little accident. So back in that time period, steamboats were the major mode of transportation, other than horses and buggies. So the river was carrying many people and many supplies westward, and obviously Lexington grew as a town because it was a major commercial hub, major stopping point where all these materials and goods were being delivered. Lots of merchant activity, and then also a lot of people coming through as well. So the story of the steamboat Saluda, this website is called the Historic Marker Database, hmdb.org. So they have a little snippet about the Saluda disaster. So it says, the steamboat Saluda disaster. In early April 1852, the aging side-wheeler steamboat Saluda churned up the Missouri River from St. Louis, bound for Canesville, Council Bluffs, Iowa. Unable to push past Lexington Bend due to ice flows and strong currents, it docked at Lexington's upper landing. Among 175 passengers still on board were people heading for various upriver towns. There were some men bound for California goldfields and about 75 Mormon immigrants, mostly Europeans, hoping to join wagon trains going to Utah Territory. On Good Friday morning, April 9th, Captain Francis Belt vowed to round the bend or blow this boat to hell. At about 7:30 a.m., the Saluda eased from the landing. Before the paddle wheels made 3 revolutions, the red-hot boilers exploded. The sound was heard 2 miles away. Passengers, crew, baggage, timbers, chimneys, and boiler scraps were blown ashore or into the river. The Saluda's bell landed high up the riverbank, as did a 600-pound safe with a yellow spotted dog killed, leashed to it, which is so awful. 2/3 of the boat, everything above the lower deck and extending back to the wheelhouse, was blown away. Currents moved the Saluda's remains back against the levee, its stern section underneath several feet of water. Estimates of the dead and missing vary from 26 to 135. Best eyewitness accounts saw about 75 were killed or lost and presumed dead, and 36 injured. Captain Belt was killed. Only 3 officers survived. Lexington's shocked citizens rallied heroically to rescue victims, nurse the wounded, raise funds for those who lost everything, and find homes for victims, for orphans. Find homes for the orphan victims. 21 victims were buried in Lexington that terrible Friday. So that 21 victims right there are what we're talking about in the mass grave, and that is in the Machpelah Cemetery. They do have a memorial in the Machpelah Cemetery. It's on the northern portion of the cemetery, and there's just like a plot of vacant land there, and that's where they buried all these poor folks that passed away in that disaster that they could find, or the pieces of them, I guess, and they put a memorial there. 21 victims were buried in Lexington that terrible Friday. Most survivors quickly found other transportation and continued their journeys. The Saluda disaster ranks as one of the worst steamboat tragedies, perhaps the worst on the Missouri River. It caused the U.S. Congress that year to enact new operation rules and stricter inspection standards for steamboats. Battle of Lexington, September 18th, 19th, and 20th, 1861. Great-great-great-grandpa fought in that battle for the South and got a head wound. It's just hard to believe. And then he was old and injured, so he quit fighting in the war and he moved back to Kentucky, where the other Lexington is. I guess they just like Lexington, whether it be Lexington, Missouri or Lexington, Kentucky. This courthouse is fascinating. Oh, that's the back of the sign. I guess there's nothing on the back of the sign. Okay.
Time capsule.
Oh, cool.
To be opened in 2072.
How cool.
200 years. And then another 50 years.
I don't know what this thing is, but it must be significant. Maybe it's a cornerstone or something.
Oh,
It's,
interesting.
I don't know what it is, but it looks very old.
ideas.